Welcome to this Wisel Power BI tutorial. In this video we'll look at how to get data from websites. We'll begin by looking at how to import from simple HTML tables on a web page, and we'll also use the Power Query Editor to clean up the data to make it usable in the report. We'll then move on and look at what to do when we don't have access to an HTML table on a page. We'll use the new Web Table Inference feature to essentially tell Power BI what we think should be a table and have it work out the rest for us automatically. For the final part of the video, we'll look at creating a query parameter and then passing the value of the parameter into a URL to get data from a web page in a more dynamic fashion. So it doesn't sound like there's much to do here, but there is quite a lot of content to get through, so let's get started. Okay, to get started in this video, we'll need an example web page to get some data from. For the first example, I'm going to use Wikipedia's list of highest grossing films. And it's a fairly good example to start with because the web page is full of nicely structured tables like this one that are very easy to import into a Power BI report. I'll copy the URL of the page from the address bar, and then I will head into a brand new blank Power BI report. I'm currently running the June 2019 update for Power BI Desktop, so if you see any differences on your screen, it may simply be because you're running a slightly different version. From here I can head to the Get Data tool in the ribbon, and then when the menu finally appears, I can choose the Web option, and then I can paste in my URL into the dialog box that appears, and then click the OK button. I then need to say how I would like to connect to this web page. Do I need to pass in any credentials, either my Windows credentials or a specific username or password, or a web API key? For Wikipedia, I can connect anonymously, so I can select the anonymous option and then click Connect. And then, when the next dialog box appears, I'll get a list of options of tables available on this page that I can select from to import into the report. So it turns out that there's quite a lot of tables in this page, some of which have nice sensible sounding names. If you're not sure what's in a table, you can simply click on its name to see a preview on the right hand side. So I can see the first table I've selected here is a list of the top 10 highest grossing films adjusted for inflation. That's not quite the one that I wanted. Instead, I'm going to go to the next one down here, highest grossing films at number 13, which is the list I just pointed you to, the 50 highest grossing films in Wikipedia's list. So having selected that one, what I want to do is check the box next to it to make sure that that's the one that I want to import. And then, although the data looks fairly clean as it is, there may be a little bit of tidying up required. So rather than just loading this straight into the data model, I'm going to click the Edit button to launch the Power Query Editor and then see what things need to happen or what things we need to do to clean up the data to make it usable. The first thing we can do is remove any columns that we're unlikely to need in the final report. So let's right-click on the References column header and then choose to remove it. Then we can try to change the data type of the worldwide gross column. I'd like this to be treated as a number, but currently it's still being treated as text. You can see from the ABC symbol in the data type button here. Unfortunately, if we try to choose a different numeric type, such as fixed decimal number, we'll end up with an error. So let's remove that step by clicking the cross next to it in the Applied Steps list. The thing that's causing the problem here is the $sign in front of the number. So what we'll need to do first is get rid of that before we can perform the data type conversion. There are several ways we could do this. One simple way is to use the Transform tab in the ribbon and then choose the Extract option. Make sure we have the worldwide gross column selected first, then choose Extract. And then we can choose Text After Delimiter. In the dialog box that appears, we can type in the $sign. And what we'll be left with when we click OK is anything in that cell that sits after the $sign. So we get just the numbers and the commas separating the 1,000 units. What we can then do is convert this into some kind of numeric data type. Let's go with fixed decimal number, and that will convert the column appropriately. Let's just alter the name of the query as well. We can do this either by double-clicking the query name over here on the left-hand side, or by entering a different name in the Properties window on the right-hand side. Let's call this Wikipedia highest grossing films. And then I'll get rid of this extra number at the end in the square brackets and then hit enter to rename that. When that's happened, all we need to do is choose to close and apply all of our changes to load this data back into the data model in the Power BI report. So from the Home tab in the ribbon, click the Close and Apply button, and then all of our data gets loaded into a new table in the report That shouldn't take too long. It's not a particularly huge table. Here we go, get a little bit of progress and some messages on the dialog box. And eventually we end up with those 50 rows loaded and visible in the fields list. Now that the data has been imported, there are a couple of other things I'd like to do. It isn't necessary to go to the data view in order to do this, but it does help us to see what's going on if I click the data button on the left-hand side of the screen. You might be able to make out that the worldwide gross column here is set to show in pounds sterling, which isn't quite right. You saw from the website that the value is actually in US dollars. So let's select the worldwide gross column and then head to the modelling tab in the ribbon. And then from there I can select different currency formats by clicking the drop-down list for the currency formats. I'll go with dollars English United States. And that adds a couple of extra decimal places which I'd like to get rid of. So let's reduce the number of decimal places back down to 0. The next thing I'd like to do is change a feature of the year column. It's not easy to see this from the year column data, but if I have a look over here at the right hand side of the screen on the fields list, the symbol listed next to the year column indicates that some kind of aggregation or summarization will happen to the year field. So if I wanted to see what that is, I can look in the default summarization option. So it tells me that by default, when I add year to a visual, it will try to sum the year, which isn't a particularly helpful thing to happen for a date. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the default summarization to don't summarize, so that the year will be treated essentially like a category field. Having done that, I'll switch back now to the report view, and then we can add a visual or two to represent this data. As a simple example of a visual, I'd like to see how much each year in my dataset contributes to the overall worldwide gross. I could do that with a pie chart or a donut chart or even a tree map. Let's go with a tree map visual. If I insert one of those by clicking the button, I can then check the year box to add the year field to the group well in the field well. I then want to add in the worldwide gross field, and I can check the box next to that to see that added to the values area of the field well. And then I'll get a visual with a differently coloured box for each year in the dataset, and the size of the box indicates how much that year contributed to the overall gross. So the biggest box will be in the top left hand corner and the smallest contribution will be in the bottom right hand corner. I can position my mouse over each coloured box to see the actual worldwide gross, so that's the sum of gross for that particular year. Now it might also be nice to be able to see the individual films which contribute to that worldwide gross. And I can do this in a couple of different ways. So for example, if I head to the title field and drag that into the details well of the field well, I'll see that each individual year's box is divided up into the films which contributed to that year. And again, the size of the box represents the relative contribution compared to the other items in that grid. So, Star Wars The Force Awakens was the single biggest contributor to the year 2015, which was the single biggest contributor to the overall worldwide gross. Now, that might be a little bit too messy, particularly if there were more films in each year. So instead of adding in the title to the details area, let's add the title into the group field instead. If I drag title from the details to the group and position it just below the year field, I'll see that apparently the titles aren't displayed at all. What I do get, however, now are these extra little buttons up in the top right hand corner of my visual. The little down arrow is the first button I want to click on. That enables drill down in the tree map and in the visual. So drill down isn't currently enabled. If I clicked on part of my tree map, nothing really happens. It just sort of grays out all of the other areas and I have to click back on that same piece to bring everything back. If I enable drill down, however, now when I click on a single piece of the tree map, it drills down and shows me a sub-level of the tree map, showing me in more obvious detail, using more space, the relative contribution of each film to that particular year. To get back to the previous level, I have to click the up arrow in the top right hand corner, and then I could pick a different year. Let's go for 1997, just Titanic, appropriately coloured in blue. Let's head back up a level. Let's go for 2018 instead. So you can see drill down is fairly intuitive. In It is also possible to drill down to see all the lower level of detail as well. The double down arrow here takes us down to see basically how much each individual film contributes to the overall worldwide gross. So again, in the top left hand corner, the biggest single contributor is Avatar currently, possibly soon to be overtaken by Avengers Endgame. It's certainly catching up. And then in the bottom right hand corner, the smallest contribution, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Again, to get back up, I can click on the up arrow to go back to the top level. The small downside of drilling down to the next level of the hierarchy is that I only see the film titles and not the year in which the film was released. So if I go back up to the top level again, and then click the split arrow, the last button here, expand all down one level in the hierarchy. The difference here is that I get to see both the year and the title for each individual film. Not quite sure about the choice of colours, but there you go. At least we can see there the contribution of each film to the overall gross. I'm going to go back up to the top level, and there's a very simple visual to display the data we've imported from Wikipedia. Okay, that was a fairly simple example of importing data from a web page. We didn't really need to do too much work to get the data into a usable format for the report. However, sometimes data needs a little more encouragement. Let's have a look at another example. I've navigated to the homepage of the imdb.com website. What I'm going to do from here is select from the drop-down list for movies, TV and showtimes the top rated movies list, which gives us a list of 250 films rated by the IMDb users. As before, I'm going to copy the URL from the address bar of my web browser, and then I can head back to the Power BI report. I'll create a new page in anticipation of creating some visuals later, and then from the Home tab in the ribbon, I will go to the Get Data option and choose Web again. I can then paste in my URL into the text box just as before, and then click OK. And then I'll be asked how I'd like to connect to the web content, so I'll go anonymously again, just as with Wikipedia, and then click Connect. When the next dialog box appears, eventually, I'll end up with a list of tables on that web page that the navigator has detected. So hopefully that won't take too long. And in this case, there are 3 separate tables. So once again, I can click through the list to find out what is in each table. So it looks to me as though table 0 is the favorite for this import. Now you might be able to tell already here that we are going to have a little more work to do. We've got the rank and the title and the year all contained in one single column, rather than nicely separated as it was in Wikipedia. So let's check the box next to table 0 and then click the edit button to launch the Power Query editor. And then when that's happened, we'll look at what things we need to change to make this usable for our report. Let's start by renaming the table first of all. Let's double click where it says table 0 and let's rename this as IMDb Top 250. When we've renamed it, we can then, as we did with the Wikipedia table, look at which columns we can safely remove. So the first blank column for sure, the Your Rating column I think, and the column with the title simply called number 2. So let's click on the first column, then hold down the Control key and click on the Your Rating column, and then this last column as well while holding down the Control key. I can then right click on any of the 3 selected columns and choose to remove them all. And that's already starting to look a little bit better. Next, I'd like to separate out the rank from the rest of the title and the year. And a simple and easy way to do that is to split the column based on a delimiter. I think I'll go with the first space character that's found in this particular column. If I right click on the column heading, I can choose to split the column by a delimiter. And then when the dialog box appears, I can choose which particular delimiter to use. I can either type in my own custom one or select from a preset list which space belongs in this list. Let's select space from the drop-down list. I don't want to split every space that's been found, otherwise I'll get the number 1 in one column, then the word the in the next column, then Shawshank in the next column. That's not quite what I want. I want to split once at the leftmost version of the space delimiter. So let's select leftmost delimiter and then click OK, and I'll get my rank split out into its own separate column. There's also an automatic changed type step that's been added, so it detected that the values split into that column were all numbers, so it's applied a numeric data type to that. Let's just change the column heading there. Let's just change the name of this one so that it's just called rank, and then that's basically that column dealt with. Now let's split off the year from the end of the title by using the rightmost space delimiter. So we can right-click the Rank and Title To column and then choose Split Column by Delimiter. We'll go with a space again and this time choose Rightmost Delimiter. When we click OK now, we'll get the title sitting in its own separate column, and then the Rank and Title 2.2 contains the year. Now, slightly strangely, we get the year as a negative number, and the reason for that is the changed type step. Just as we saw the rank was changed to a numeric data type after splitting it off, Power BI has tried to do the same with the year. But because the year was held in a set of round brackets or parentheses, if I click back on a previous step, we can see that. It thought that these were negative numbers and formatted them appropriately. That's not quite what we wanted, so what can we do about this? Well, there are several things we could choose to do. What I'm going to do in this example is get rid of the change type to automatic step. Then I'm going to extract from the entire string in this column the middle 4 characters, everything within the round brackets. So to do that, I can head to the Transform tab in the ribbon and then choose Extract. And then I can choose Text Between Delimiters. So in here I can type in my start delimiter as an open round bracket and the end delimiter as a closed round bracket. If I then click OK, I'll end up with just the year. I can then just change the column headings of these two columns. Let's call the first one just title and the second one just year. Finally, I'll just change the data type of this column manually, so it's currently still being set or detected as text. Let's change the data type of the year column to a whole number, and then that's basically that data set transformed the way we want it to be. Let's switch back to the Power BI desktop application, so we can click back on the Home tab, click the Close and Apply button to save all of our transformations, all of our changes, and load this data into the data model. So eventually, when the 250 rows have been loaded, we should see a new table sitting on the right-hand side in the fields list. Now, just as we did with the Wikipedia data, there may be some changes we'd like to make to the data now it's been imported into the data model. First of all, you might be able to make out again that the year column in the IMDb data is set to be aggregated or summarized in some way. If I select the year field here, we don't need to switch to the data view to do this. We can just switch straight to the modeling tab in the ribbon and see that its default summarization is to sum. So let's change that back so that it's not summarizing at all. We can click Don't Summarize, and that symbol should then disappear next to that field. The other thing that I'd like to change isn't visible on either the report view or the data view. To see this, I'll need to switch to the model view, so let's click on that button here on the left-hand side. You should be able to see that Power BI thinks our tables are related, and it's created a relationship between the two rank columns in these tables. The reason it does that is because those columns have exactly the same name and type, so it thinks, oh, those must be related, I'll create a relationship automatically, which isn't quite what we wanted in this case. The first ranked item in the Wikipedia data certainly might not be the same first ranked item in the IMDb top 250 data. So let's delete this relationship. If I right click on the line and choose to delete it, we'll be asked to confirm that we want to do that, so let's click delete, and then that relationship will be gone. If we want to stop that from happening for future tables we import into the same report, if we want to choose when to create relationships ourselves, we can change that setting from the File menu. If we head to the File menu, choose Options and Settings, and then choose Options. When the dialog box finally appears, we can head to the Current File section at the bottom and then click on Data Load. There's a little checkbox here that says Auto Detect New Relationships after data is loaded. If we uncheck that box and then click OK, that will prevent any new automatic relationships being created. Having done all that, let's switch back to the report view. Now let's add in a visualization to display the IMDb data. I'll add in a line and clustered column chart this time, and then I'm going to add the year field from the IMDb dataset. That adds year to the shared axis box. Now I'd like to see how many films were released in each year in the top 250. So let's drag the title field into the column values area. Then I can just increase the size of the chart to make it a little bit more readable. Then I'd also like to see in the line part of the chart, I'd like to see the average IMDb rating. So let's drag the IMDb rating field into the line values area. That will apply a sum aggregate by default, so let's change that so that it uses an average instead. So I can click on the drop-down list next to IMDb rating and choose average instead. That plots the average on the secondary y-axis, which is set to start by default at the lowest possible value for that line, which looks a little bit odd to me. These aren't intended to sort of zero out, so let's maybe just adjust the starting point for the y-axis. With the chart selected, I can head to the Format panel using the Paint Roller tool here. Then if I find the y-axis card, I can expand that by clicking the drop-down arrow. Then I can scroll down to find the y-axis for the line. So there's a y-axis line. Then find the start box. And maybe let's try typing in, let's go for the number 7 for the start. That just raises the lines up. That looks okay. Let's stick with that for the time being. Now I can see that some years have multiple films released in them, but I can't currently see what those films are. If I hover the mouse over one of the columns here, it simply shows me the year and the count of title, so the values that are actually in the chart. One way I could see this is by adding a second visual to the report. So maybe if I added in a simple table, for example, let's add a table next door to the chart. And then if I add in the title field to the table by ticking the box, if I then maybe added in the year field as well to the table, I can then click on a single column in the chart. So this is the one for 1995 with 8 releases. If I click on 1995, it filters the table to show me all the films released in that year. To bring everything back again, I can click on the column again, and then all the films come back. Now, although the table works quite well, it does occupy quite a lot of space on the page, and it might be preferable just to see the film titles by hovering the mouse over a column in the chart. Currently, the film titles don't exist at all in the tooltip. If I want to add them in, I'll need to have the chart selected, and then I can drag the title field from the IMDb dataset into the tooltips box in the field well. Once I've done that, I'll see only the first title, unfortunately, if I position the mouse cursor over a column. So what I want to do now is calculate the full list of all of the titles for a particular year. One way to do that is by adding something called a measure. You write measures in the DAX language, Data Analysis Expressions, but fortunately Power BI provides you with a quick way to get started with measures. You don't need to learn how to write DAX immediately. Let's just get rid of the first title field from the tooltips area. Then I'm going to right click on my IMDb Top 250 dataset. Having done that, I'm going to choose to add a new quick measure. And that will present me with a dialog box allowing me to pick from a set of preset calculations using this drop-down list up here at the top left. If I click there first of all and then scroll down through the list, what I'm looking for is this last item, the concatenated list of titles. If I select that, I then get to choose which field from my dataset I want to concatenate. So in this case, it will be the title from the IMDb dataset. Then I'll get the choice of how many items should be concatenated before it truncates the list. So we saw earlier on that that the max count in here is 8 for 1995. If I set the number to less than 8, let's go for 5 to begin with. Let's click OK. Now, several things will happen here. First of all, my measure will get added to my IMDb table, and I'll also see a dialog box pop up showing me the DAX expression required to perform this calculation. You can see why I did it the quick way rather than wrote it all out from scratch. To remove this panel here, let's just click in any other part of the report window. And then if I hover before I hover the mouse over, I should drag my new measure into the tooltips area of my chart. Having done that, I can hover the mouse over a column in the chart now, and I can see a comma-separated list of titles. You can see it only gets to 5, however, before it replaces any remaining ones with etc. If I wanted to modify this so it could see the full list, what I'll need to do is select my measure in the field list on the right hand side to bring back this panel. And although I didn't write this code myself, I can still edit it. I can click next to this line here which says var, so it's a variable declaration, max values to show. It's got a fairly sensible name. We set that to 5 originally. Let's modify it so it's set to 8 instead. We can accept that change in a couple of ways. We can tick the or click the tick to commit our changes, or we could have just clicked away from that panel again. It sometimes takes a little while to update. But if I click away from the panel and then hover the mouse over one of these columns again, now I can see the full list of 8 titles in the year 1995. There's another quick measure which fits in quite nicely with the data we're looking at here, which provides a star rating for a range of values. Let's right-click the IMDb dataset again and choose New Quick Measure. From the drop-down list up at the top here, we can go down to the bottom of the list and pick the star rating option. We'll need to add in a data field, so let's add in the IMDb rating field to that. And then from the drop-down list, let's make sure we're picking the average, not the sum. We can then specify the number of stars we'd like to see in total. Let's rate this out of 10. And then the value for the lowest star rating will be 0, and the value for the highest rating will be 10. So that matches the star rating system on IMDb. Now bear in mind that the range of values we're looking at here is quite narrow. The lowest is 8 and the maximum is about 9.2. So we're not going to see much variation in the number of stars we see appear, but we can always modify this slightly afterwards. Let's click OK to create the measure, and we'll see the code again, which creates the measure in the first place. Somewhat nicer than having to type it all out ourselves. We have again the option to modify the little settings we've applied, so we can always come back to this and tweak our settings later on. Let's just click away from that text box first so we can add the new measure average of IMDb rating into the tooltips area of the chart. If we drop that in just below list of title values, and then if we hover the mouse over a column this time, we should see a little star rating pop up. So for 1995, the average rating, if I have a quick look there, that was 8.28. So the number of stars we see is 8. So there's 8 coloured in stars and 2 blank ones. If we go for this year here, whichever this one is, 1972, if I can find that one, 1972, 73, 72, there we go. So that the number of films is very low, just one film, the rating exceeds 9, so we get 9 stars coloured in and 1 blank one. If we wanted to see a bit more variation in the stars, we could tweak the settings a little bit. Let's click back on the average of IMDb rating measure, and let's say that the minimum rated value, let's bump that up to, let's say 5 instead of 0. So we bump that up to 5. We can click the tick or click the check to commit to those changes, and then click away from the text box to allow us to hover the mouse over a column again. And then there we go, so we're seeing a slightly more variation in the number of stars coloured in this case. So there we go. So we've seen a couple of examples of importing data from simple tables on a web page, but sometimes data isn't quite so well structured as all that. Let's have a look at another example. If I switch back to my web browser, I've got a new tab open here where I've navigated back to the homepage of the IMDb website. What I want to do here is click on the drop-down list where it says All next to the search box and choose Advanced Search. From here I'm going to use an advanced title search, which allows me a huge number of different options for searching for different types of media, not just films, but also TV shows and video games, etc. Just to keep things simple so far, I'm going to check one of the genres in the genres list. I'm going to go for the action genre. And then having done that, I can scroll down to the very bottom of the page, going through all the various other options available, and then click the search button. And that will return a list of the top 50 action movies and TV shows and other content, which looks like a fairly well structured table to me. I've got some nice regular structure to this page at least. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to copy this URL again, so I can right click and copy, and then switch back to my Power BI report. Let's just add a new blank page and then choose to get some more data from the web connector. I can then paste in my URL in the usual way and then click OK. Because I've already connected anonymously once to IMDb, I'm not asked for my credentials again. It just jumps straight to the navigator page. And it then shows me 2 different options: document, which doesn't provide me with much of anything at all, and then table 0, which was the correct option last time, but this time definitely not what I want. I'm not, or the content of the web page isn't exposed to the web import tool in Power BI currently. Bear in mind this might have changed by the time you watch this video, but at present what the web import tool looks for is HTML tables on a web page. If you're not sure what that means, let me briefly demonstrate. If I switch back to, let's switch back to the Wikipedia example from earlier on. This is a fairly clearly defined table, as you can see here. I've got rows and columns, and if I wasn't sure that it definitely was a table, I can find out in HTML terms by right-clicking on a part of the table, and then the option depends on exactly which web browser you're using, but in Chrome I can click the Inspect option, and that will open up an extra panel on the right-hand side showing me the HTML that structures this website and this web page. So if I look in the item I've just right-clicked on, I right-clicked on something called a TH, a table header cell. And if I look one row up from that, it's part of a table row tag, and that's part of a table header tag. And if I go up a couple more rows, that's part of a table tag. So in a set of angled brackets here, I've clearly got an HTML table. The same is true for the IMDb Top 50. If I just close that panel down for Wikipedia, switch back to the IMDb Top 50, if I right-clicked on something in the table and choose Inspect, then I can see that this is part of a TD, a table cell tag, and then that's part of a table row tag, table body, table header, and then a table tag in which all that sits. If I try to do the same thing for the top 50 action movies, if I right-click on part of what looks like a nicely structured list and choose Inspect, I can see that this definitely is not part of a table. These are just a sort of nested collections of div tags, so there's no table tag in sight, which means that currently the Power BI web importer can't recognize that particular structure. So let's cancel out of this dialog box, we can't use it as it stands, and look at what we can do to get this set of data imported. As I mentioned earlier, I'm running the June 2019 update of Power BI Desktop, and there is a feature that's available that could help us at this point. But currently the feature is still in preview, so it isn't available in the standard menu at the moment. What I need to do to make this work is head to the File menu first, and then choose Options and Settings, followed by Options. When the dialog box appears, I'll click on the Preview Features option on the left-hand side, and this gives you an idea as to where Power BI is headed in the near future. There are lots of options that are currently in preview that will be brought into a full release at some point in the future. Bear in mind some of these things have been sitting here for quite some time, like the shape map visual. The one I'm going to go for in this case anyway is the new Web Table Inference option. If I check that box and then click OK, I'll probably be told yes I do. I get told that I need to restart the product, so let's click OK first. And then let's just save the report, as we'll need to close it down and then reopen it. So I'll hit the Save button, pick a location to save your report, and I don't know, let's call this importing. I'll spell that with some sensible capitalization, importing from websites. If I save the report and wait for it to be saved, I can then close down Power BI Desktop, and then I can head to the Start menu and open up Power BI again. And then when it's opened, I can reopen the report I was just working with. Hopefully that won't take too long. He says, there we go, nearly there. And I can just click on my recently used file here, importing from websites, to reopen that same report. The new feature we've just enabled doesn't give us any more options in the Get Data list, but it does change the way the Web Import tool works. If I choose to get data from web again, and then paste in the URL that should still be my clipboard, if I paste in the same search for the action genre, when I click OK this time, the dialog box that appears, although it looks quite similar eventually, when it finally does appear, as well as the basic options we saw previously, means it's taking a little longer this time to load. That's because it's going to detect a lot more options for us. You can see it's recognized an HTML table here, which doesn't have much of interest in it whatsoever. It's also got a list of suggested tables. So these are things that aren't HTML tables, but do look like structured content to the Web Import tool. Now, not all of these will be absolutely perfect. This one looks like it's got something like at least a description of the film, and then some I don't know, number of votes and a rate column. That's not particularly useful. Let's have a look at the next table along. That's table number 3. So again, we've got the description of the film, followed by the director of the film. That's not particularly helpful. Table 4. That looks a lot better to me. There we go. We've got a rank and then a title, a year, some genres, and then some other things, and maybe a rating there, a duration in minutes. That looks pretty good to me. That's a pretty good set of data. Now, the even cooler thing about all this, although that table 4 looks like exactly what I want, if you found that any of these tables didn't include the correct set of content, you can structure your own. And this is the really exciting part of this entire process. If I click the Add Table Using Examples option, the idea of the dialog box that appears now is that I can tell Power BI what I expect to get from the web page, and for it to work out how to structure the rest of the content to fit. So if I just scroll down, I get a little preview of the web page itself loaded at the top. So if, for example, I wanted to get in the first column of my output, I wanted to get the rank of each item that's been presented to me in this list. If I try typing into the column box, if I type in 1 followed by a full stop, it presents me the list of choices for matching values that it's found within various HTML tags in that web page. If I double click the 1 followed by a full stop, if I then click into the next box down and type in 2 followed by a full stop, and again double click that item from the list, and it sometimes needs a little bit of prompting. Oh, there we go. If I click away from that one, it's inferred, hence the name of the feature, it's inferred that the next item should be the number 3, followed by the number 4, followed by the number 5, and so on. Now that's not all that impressive, I'll admit. There are many ways to fill in a sequence of numbers. Where it gets really impressive is if I add a new column, and in here I'm going to start typing in the title of each item. So let's go with Murder Mystery, and again I can see that it's been selected in the list if I double click on it. If I then click into the next box, I can start typing in the next title in the sequence. I can type in Men in Black, and I want to make sure I select the correct option, Men in Black International. Let's double click on that. And then if I click into the next box down, and this is the impressive bit, look, it's worked out from this point on that it wants this particular HTML tag from each of the other structured sections relating to content. From this point on, it's just a case of continuing with the other values you want. So if I add another column, let's pick the year. If I type in an open parenthesis and go for 2019, 2019, and then let's pick the correct one from the list by double clicking. And then again below this one, I don't even need to tell it the next one, it's worked out the rest itself already. And then I can go along again. It's not always quite as successful as you'd like it to be, I don't think. If I try to go with the rating applied, so 12, 12A, etc. If I try to go for 12, that's not picked out in the list properly at all. I might try going for 12A in the second box. If I go for 12A here, and then let's see, yeah, it doesn't find any particular feature that contains that. I don't think there's much we can do about that at this point, but that's okay. I can live without the rating. Let's replace the rating with the time in minutes instead. Let's change the top option to 97 min, and then select that one. And then the second row down, we'll change that so that it's 114 min. So let's type in 114 and then go for min there. And that should hopefully be enough to trigger the inference of the rest. Excellent. Let's get a couple more values, and then we'll actually load this data, or at least edit it to make it make sense. So we'll go for the genre list. Let's add a new one. Let's go for action, which is this one, action, comedy, crime. So if I find the action, comedy, crime option and fill that in, and then yep, that's enough to infer the rest. Nearly there. Let's go for the rating, the 6.0, and then the other rating, so 6.0 for that one, and then 5.7 for this one. Is not quite enough. One value this time. Let's go for a second value for 5.7, and that is enough. So I get 9.4 for the next one, which matches, and 8.0 for the next, which also matches. And finally, one last column, we'll go for the number of votes that particular piece of content has. So I can go for 41,441. It pops up in the list. I can double click. Is that enough to infer the rest? Not quite. So the next one down is 22,110. So 22,110. And that is enough to infer the rest. Let's just create some very quick column headings by double clicking. Let's call the first one rank, and then the second one can be title, and then the third one can be year. Let's just change that again. Let's go year. I'll spell it properly eventually. There we go. Let's call this one run time. I'll spell that with an R, run time. There we go. I'll call this one genres. And then this one will be rating, again with an R preferably. And then finally, number of votes, or just votes, with a V preferably. It seems to miss off the first key press there. All right, so having done all that, let's click OK. That will return us to the original Navigator dialog box with a new custom table called Table 9. What a perfect name for it. And you can see it's picked out all the data we've asked for. There are a few things we might need to tidy up, so let's click the Edit button to load the Power Query Editor, and then just do a quick bit of final tidying up before we do then load this data into our data model. Let's go with the easy one first and get the runtime extracted from the word minutes. If we select the runtime column and then head to the transform tab in the ribbon, then we can head to the extract option and extract everything before a particular delimiter. So when the dialog box appears, we can type in a space, click OK, and that will strip off the word minutes. We can then hopefully change the data type of this column so that it's not text, it's a whole number, and that's the runtime column dealt with. Next, let's look at how we get the year out from this data. This is going to be a little trickier because there are several variations on the way the year works. So let's see. I think what we'll do first is we'll extract or split everything based on moving from a text character to a numeric character. So to do that, let's right click the year column, and then we can choose, let's choose split column by non-digit to digit, or by text to number if you prefer. Okay, so that's not too bad. We've got the year separated out into, or the start year at least, into one column, and then the end year into another. Let's delete the first year, or remove the first year column. We don't need that anymore. That's just full of junk. Then let's see what else can we do. So for the year column, I guess a simple thing to do will be to extract the first 4 characters from that string. So let's let's select the year 2 column and then say extract. And then let's go for the first characters, and we'll go with the first 4, and then we can click OK, and that should hopefully strip off all the remaining characters, all the random junk text. Then we should be able to change the type of this one to a whole number, and that looks pretty good. Let's change the name of that one so it's called start year. And then we can do something similar for the other year column. Let's select that. And then we can extract the first 4 characters from there, and then OK. And then we can change this one to a whole number as well, and then change this one end year. Change this one to end year, I should say. All right, that looks not too bad. I think I'll leave all the genres in a single comma separated list rather than although we could easily separate them based on the comma delimiter. That wouldn't be too difficult, but I think I'll keep them all as a single continuous list at this point. Having done that, let's head back to the Home tab of the ribbon, and then, before we close and apply it, let's rename the table as well. Let's say IMDb popular 50, something like that, or most voted for 50, something along those lines. And anything that distinguishes it from the other IMDb table. Having done that, let's close and apply the query, and then we should find we end up with yet another table imported from a website without an actual HTML table inside, which, if you're anything like me, if you've struggled in the past to do this sort of thing using your own custom code, this is all pretty damn impressive stuff. Let's just change the summarization option for the year column if I expand my popular 50 table, and we can do this for both the end year and the start year using the modeling tab. Make sure that those aren't summarized at all. So we can select those 2 and then choose don't summarize for start year as well. Then let's just add in a very basic visual to display some of the information from this dataset. I don't care too much about whether this makes sense or not at this point. Let's add in another line and a clustered column chart, and then we'll add the year field, or the start year field at least, to the shared axis. Then I'd like to find out how many votes have been accumulated for content in each year. So I'm going to drag the votes field into the column values area. So there we go, there's the total number of votes accumulated. Then let's just add in the average runtime to the line area. So I'm going to go for the runtime field, drag that to the line values, and then change that from a sum of runtime to an average instead. So not the most sensible columns to compare, but nonetheless we've got our data being displayed from our web page in this visual. For the final part of this video, I'd like to look at how we can use a parameter to load different sets of content from the same URL. The way this works, if I switch back quickly to the IMDb website, and let's just close down our extra panel that we opened up earlier on, you might be able to make out from the URL in the address bar that after the main part of the URL there's a question mark, which is the start of the query string parameters, and then genres equals action. That suggests that we could modify this value here to a different value and return a different set of content. Now, traditionally, of course, you do this by going back to the search page and then choosing a different genre, or multiple genres, in fact. Let's just uncheck action and check. Let's go for sci-fi instead, and then click the search box. If we have a look at the results now, we get essentially the same web page, the same base URL, but genres equals sci-fi this time rather than action. So that suggests we might be able to modify this ourselves. And if we did try to do that, let's just try changing sci-fi. We could go back to action, but let's try a different one. Let's try adventure instead. And if we do that and click or press enter, we'll end up with a different set of content with the same base URL. This is really all quite interesting, and it's something we can take advantage of in our query in our Power BI report. What we really need to know in order to make this work properly is what range of values we have access to. I'm not going to create an entire list here, but it is helpful to see what options we have available. So if I scroll back to or navigate back to the query page, things like action, comedy, adventure, crime, sci-fi, those are good examples. So let's use some of those. To make this work in our query, I'll switch back to the Power BI desktop application, and then from the Home tab in the ribbon, I'll click the bottom half of the Edit Queries button and choose Edit Queries. Just before we perform this next step, it's worthwhile going back quickly to Power BI Desktop and check that you have a particular setting enabled. If I switch back to the File menu and choose Options and Settings, and then choose Options from the menu. When the dialog box appears, I'll head to the Power Query Editor page, and I just want to check that you have this little checkbox here checked in the Parameters section, Always Allow Parameterization in Data Source and Transformation Dialogs. If you haven't got that set, you can tick the box and click OK. I'll just click Cancel as I've already got it set, then switch back to the Power Query Editor and switch to the IMDb Popular 50 dataset or query. What I want to do is edit the very first step of this query, the source. And if I click the gear or the cog icon next door to that option, I'll find the same original dialog box that I saw when I pasted in my simple URL. This time I'm going to use the advanced mode of the From Web connector. And what I want to do is get rid of the current genre action from the end of the list, from the query string, and replace that with a parameter instead. So from the drop-down list next door to this empty text box, I can create a new parameter by clicking the appropriate option. I can give the parameter a sensible name. Let's call it chosen genre. I'll then set the type for this parameter to text. Passing text into a query string is always text in the URL. Whether you type in a number or a date, it's still text. I'll provide my user with a list of choices so that they don't just type in any random value and get nothing returned. Let's choose a list of values from the drop-down list here. Then we can type in a list of values as we saw on the web page. So action, adventure, and then let's go for crime and drama. If you're not sure of the correct spelling for any of these, by the way, you can always go back to the IMDb page and then just try checking a box. So for example, for sci-fi, if I check the box next to sci-fi and then hit the search button down at the bottom, I'll find that I've got the correct spelling, the exact spelling for that option in the query string parameter there. It might not match exactly what's displayed next to the checkbox. So you can just copy that from the URL, head back to Power Query, and then paste that in so you get the exact correct spelling. I'll just set the default value here to action and then the current value to action as well, and then click OK. and then that parameter will be selected for the second part of my URL. I should see then at the end I've got genres equals chosen genre, so whatever value appears in that parameter will be the value passed into the URL. For more complex query strings, I can just carry on adding parts and then essentially concatenating the entire list of query strings to make sure that I get my dynamic URL working properly. But for this particular example, I'm just going to delete that extra part that I've added. Then I can click OK, and then when the query has been performed again, I'll switch back to the final step of my query to make sure that it still looks sensible. So I've got Murder Mystery, Men in Black International, Game of Thrones, etc. Let's just try changing this then from action to a different genre. Let's select the parameter we've created, and then from the drop down list we should be able to choose, let's go with crime. That should be sufficiently different. When you've selected that, it might take a little time for the query to reload, but when you switch back to the query, here it goes, there it goes, done. So I've got Murder Mystery, then Jessica Jones, and Big Little Lies, Dark, Lucifer. So a different list this time with crime films. Obviously some action films will still appear. Some some content belongs to different genres of course, but crime is the predominant one here. We can check that again of course. We can switch back and choose, let's go for sci-fi this time and click back on the IMDb popular list. So I've got Black Mirror, Men in Black, Jessica Jones, Avengers Endgame. So again, sci-fi is the predominant option in this list here. I've got some that aren't shown with the sci-fi genre, but are still considered in the sci-fi genre by IMDb apparently. Let's just see what this looks like then when we switch back to the report. If I close and apply my query changes now, and then eventually head back to the report, we should see that as this query has changed from action, the visuals will change automatically here as well. Eventually, there we go. And we can also change this from the report view as well. So if I head back to my edit queries drop down list up here, I might need to just sometimes this happens when you navigate back from the query editor back to Power BI Desktop, none of the menus are active. So a quick thing to do is just switch away from Power BI Desktop, switch back to Power BI Desktop, and then suddenly everything works again. So nicely I can edit my parameters here in the desktop view. I can click Edit Parameters. I'll get a separate dialog box. I can click on, let's go with Adventure this time, and click OK. The web page will be requeried. If I click the Apply Changes at least, the web page will be requeried, and then I'll bring in the adventure films this time, and my visuals will update, should update any minute now, to show me the details for adventure films. So the point of creating this fairly useless visual was to show you that things are clearly changing as we edit our parameter values. So yeah, some nice dynamic URLs there to get a different list of content from essentially the same base URL. One more go at changing this. Let's go for drama films and we'll see what we get this time. A completely different list entirely. So there we go. Okay, so there we go. Several different ways of getting content from a web page using the web import tool in Power BI. I'm sure you'll find some of those techniques useful in the real world, maybe with some more serious data rather than just lists of movies, but nonetheless the techniques themselves will be important and useful to you, I'm sure. Thanks for watching. See you next time.